Welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and today we have our second ever episode of Classic Board Game Corner, where I choose a classic of a board game, a game of renown, a game that has been massively successful for our industry, within our industry for a very, very long time, and I just sit back and talk a little bit about its history, my experiences with it, and other thoughts and ideas. So today, as I mentioned, is the second episode ever, and I will be covering a very classic board game in our hobby, and that is Carcassonne. And this game, Carcassonne here, was designed by Klaus-Jürgen Wrede. It was originally published, I believe, in Germany by Hansenglück, and brought over to North America by Rio Grande Games. This edition here, though, is from Z-Man Games. Z-Man currently has the rights to this massively successful game, Carcassonne. So Carcassonne, besides being a massively successful game that I believe has sold over 10 million units in products over the course of its history, the last 20 plus years, 21 years or so, that's very, very impressive by the standards of the average hobby game. Yes, some of these really mass market games like Monopoly have probably sold more in the last 20 years, but that's a different story. So this game is very successful, and it's been responsible for lots of innovations within the industry. First of all, the idea that the board is being constructed as you play, almost like a puzzle, right? Quite often when I introduce this game to other people, that's one of the first things that they acknowledge, one of the first things that they state, that this game kind of reminds them of putting together or assembling a puzzle. And that's very much the case. And it's such a cool, mind-blowing idea because you're used to board games being a static board that you interact with and that's there from the very get-go. It might evolve or change in ways throughout the game, but not necessarily being constructed as the game plays. And that's exactly what's happening with Carcassonne. Carcassonne also introduced the idea of tile placement as a major board game mechanism. Theoretically, tile placement existed before Carcassonne. There were games that included cardboard tiles as a game component, and you would place them on certain spots of the board, but it wasn't as important where you placed them, right? It was more important what tile you placed. Carcassonne, the location of where you place the tiles became important. It kind of became the heart of the game. And very thoughtful, thought-provoking, strategic opportunities arise based on that simple decision of where do I place this tile that I just drew. So that was a very important innovation for this game. Also, it basically introduced the idea of the meeple, right? Such a popular concept nowadays. I follow my Instagram, and I swear maybe like a third of the people I'm following have the name or the word meeple within their Instagram name. So it's very interesting. It's such a popular term, but yeah, Carcassonne invented it. I mean, I don't think they coined the phrase themselves. I think it might have been coined by some fan or what have you. I haven't looked too much into the history, but this idea of a wooden piece shaped in the form of a person, right? An anthropomorphized piece of wood with a head, distinguishable arms and legs, right? Limbs. That was really cool. You know, you could have just used cubes. Before Carcassonne, that's what most games did, especially Euro games. They used cubes. And this kind of brought a little bit of life and lightheartedness to the game. And these wooden pieces that represented different figures, different personalities, right? You have your monks and your highwaymen and your knights. They actually came to life because of their human form, their human shape. So that was really cool. And lots of games borrow this concept going forward. So really cool contribution. Another thing about Carcassonne is its streamlined mechanism. Such a simple mechanism. You draw a tile randomly, you place it, find a place where you can legally lay it on the board, and afterward make the simple decision. Do I want to lay a meeple on that tile or not? Right? Do I have meeples to place? And if I do, is it worth placing it there? Really cool, neat, subtle, smooth mechanism. So easy to teach and to explain. And yet packed with some interesting decisions as the game progresses. So I think that's a really wonderful contribution to the industry, this idea of elegance in what is a very thoughtful and strategic game. Carcassonne has had very much success, a lot of success over the decades, and that's one of the reasons why it has so many expansions. Quite often that's what happens with these games when they're massively successful. And Carcassonne is no exception to that rule. Carcassonne has 10 official expansions, which I happen to own 9 out of those 10. I do not own the Catapult expansion because it is out of print and it doesn't look like it's something I'd be interested in. I've heard that it was a flop or a fail of an expansion, and it's not, for me at least, it's not worth, albeit I am a completionist, it's not worth spending the money to complete my collection. But 10 expansions, 10 major expansions, not to mention all the minor expansions. There are lots of minor expansions that have circulated for this game over the years. Not to mention promotional content, promos that the board game publishers and designers have offered to fans and customers throughout the years at different conventions and or other events. And on top of that, you also have fan-made variants, right? And that's kind of like when you know you've arrived, when fans start making variants to your game, and by variants I mean plural, right? When you pluralize the variant there, that's when you know you've arrived as a board game. And Carcassonne has tons of those as well. There's just so many ways people have come up with solo variants, right? They enjoy this game so much that although the game has not come up with a solo variant, and none of its iterations throughout history has solved that problem officially, the solo problem, which technically speaking wasn't a problem 20 years ago, but nowadays with solo gaming being as popular as it is, but people have taken it upon themselves to come up with these different solo variants. So yeah, this game has just been very utterly successful in so many ways. And on top of all these expansion content, you have the spin-offs to this game. This game has spin-offs, and that's again another sign of success. These standalone games that take the core essence of Carcassonne, add a few wrinkles, a few different changes and modifications, maybe paste a different theme on it and what have you, and then make its own standalone product that you can sell on its own. And I personally own lots of this standalone content, which I have some of it right here. For example, Carcassonne Gold Rush. This is a Wild West themed game, Wild West themed iteration of Carcassonne. You have Carcassonne Hunters and Gatherers, which by the way, I believe is getting a new reprint with better art and design, because this is the original 2002 edition from Rio Grande Games that isn't the most colorful or the nicest looking compared to modern standards, but this is a very cool, deeper, stingier implementation of Carcassonne. And you have tons of other iterations that have come out over the years. You have Amazonas, you have the South Seas, all the Around the World series, which have been some of the more recent implementations, culminating finally in Safari, which was a few years back. We haven't had a new iteration of Carcassonne in quite some time, but I'm curious to see if there will be some more. You also have, along with Carcassonne Hunters and Gatherers, some other major out-of-print iterations of this game. You have the Castle, which is one that I happen to own, and it's currently my favorite way to play Carcassonne, which was actually designed by another designer, Rainer Knizia, right? So it's actually another designer took Klaus-Jürgen Wrede's baby, and I guess had to get permission because it was published by Rio Grande Games, and kept the Carcassonne title and patent there, their intellectual property, and Rainer Knizia was able to make his own 2-player only alterations to this game, which I find to be very, very cool and successful in that regard. Also, they came out with The City, which was Klaus-Jürgen Wrede, and that's another out-of-print one. There was also The New World, which I believe may have been by Leo Colovini. There was an iteration of Carcassonne that was designed by Leo Colovini. So again, you have another designer who's not Klaus-Jürgen Wrede, who was so captivated by this game that they decided, hey, I want to, get my hands on this game as well and see what I can add and contribute to its legacy. Even though I don't think that game was very much successful. But the point is, the base game itself warrants this idea of, hey, let's make more out of this. Let's expand this universe. Let's reuse this same core idea in different ways, because it's so appealing, it's so palatable, it's so enjoyed by our fan base that we might as well create these spin-offs. And again, Carcassonne just continues to print out all these different this different content. Now let's talk about competitors, because competition truly breeds success. And that is one of the reasons why, Carcassonne has injected so much life into the board game hobby, because it's inspired other people to compete and, build on the success of Carcassonne, stand on the shoulders of greats like Carcassonne and Klaus-Jürgen Breede, and make these different games with similar ideas. For example, Alhambra, another game that had some relative success. Now, Alhambra is nowhere nearly as successful as Carcassonne. You do not see Alhambra in all the stores that you see Carcassonne, and it hasn't sold the tens of millions of copies as Carcassonne has, but it is a former Spiel des Jahres winner. And it has a similar idea of tile placement with a bunch of other mechanisms incorporated. But the idea is that the tile placement, the orientation of how you place your tiles, actually matters. You also have a more recent game called Isle of Skye, designed by Alexander Pfister, and I believe he had a co-designer for that game. And that game has been relatively successful as well, and it's critically acclaimed, highly regarded, and highly ranked on BoardGameGeek.com. Again, it's not going to rival Carcassonne in its mass market appeal. And also, I believe Isle of Skye, which I have not played, is a little bit more of a next step than Carcassonne. Even Alhambra is a little bit of a next step, but Isle of Skye, from what I gather, is even more of a next step to Carcassonne. But again, I've heard that it's an interesting alternative. But again, the idea is that these board game designers are taking this amazing idea that Carcassonne first introduced, and they're piggybacking on it. So yeah, the popularity of tile placement continues to grow. There's lots of games that introduce it as a peripheral mechanism, perhaps not as a main mechanism, like some games like Alhambra and Isle of Skye. There are other games where it's a secondary, tertiary mechanism to complete a more complete, fuller, robust gaming experience. But it is a popular, tactically satisfying board game mechanism. The idea of grabbing these tiles, holding on to them for a while as you decide where to place them. I've had people that I've gamed with verbally communicate that idea that they tactically enjoy the idea of placing tiles down. So yeah, again, you got the popularity of meeples. I want to talk a little bit about my experience with Carcassonne. I first played Carcassonne back in 2014. We're talking about almost 7 years ago. I first played this game. So it's actually one of the first hobby games or designer games that I was ever introduced to. And as a matter of fact, I introduced it to myself after having played Catan and Rivals for Catan and some of these Catan spin-offs. I was really excited. I was browsing through games in Amazon, and one of the games that was quite often recommended to me because of my Catan purchases was Carcassonne, right? And I bought it. And I remember thinking it was cool, but at the same time being a little bit underwhelmed. I felt that it was a bit simplistic. And the truth is, I could not wrap my mind around its brilliance back then. And that's a testament to how conducive this game is to gateway gaming, because this game is so simple to teach. The rules are so simple. Draw a tile. You don't even choose your tiles. You draw them. You place a tile. There's a choice right there, but sometimes even that choice is limited. And then you have the 50-50 choice. Do you want to place your meeple on that tile or do you not? And that's it. And then wait till these different features complete, pick them up, and so on and so forth. So simple. It takes several plays of Carcassonne to realize how deep, thought-provoking, and challenging and stimulating those simple decisions can be, and how chess-like the game could feel, especially at a 2-player count. I think once you add to the player count, Carcassonne becomes incrementally more chaotic, right? Once you play 5-player Carcassonne, you're kind of just playing to have some silly fun, I feel, at that point, because the randomization of 5 people, sharing all those tiles just makes it feel so much more luck-based. When you're playing 2, and maybe even with 3 people, you feel like you're more in control. Yes, luck is gonna play a factor. You're gonna have some bad luck, but you also factor in you're probably gonna have some good luck, and somewhere in between. But you also feel like you're in more control of your decisions, and that your win or your outcomes has a little bit more to do with how you fared as a player. So very cool, and again, chess-like in that regard. And especially when you add the expansions, I personally, the first and second expansion, you have inns and cathedrals and traders and builders. I don't always play with their tiles because I think their tiles are a good variety for occasional gameplay, but I always play with the new meeple pieces that they introduce. They introduced the Grande meeple figure, which counts as 2 of your regular meeples, and they introduce the builder and the pig. The pig adds to the value of your farmers, or at least one of your farmers, and the builder incentivizes you for continuing to advance a certain feature on the board in order to draw additional tiles, right? So it kind of creates this concept of a mega turn, if you will, on Carcassonne, where instead of placing 1 tile down, you'll actually get to place 2. And I also play with the Abbott minor expansion, which is another additional piece for you to play on your monasteries, but also for you to play on your gardens, which is the only piece that can go on those garden spaces on some of those tiles. I always play with those meeples because, again, I feel like it adds a little bit to the weight without necessarily adding to the game length, because throwing in some additional tiles will add to the game length of Carcassonne. Having additional meeples will not add to the game length. It'll just simply add to the decision-making opportunities that the game provides. And once you play it like that, it already feels like a next step game to me, and I'm really, really enjoying myself. Carcassonne, till this day, is one of my favorite games of all time, folks. It ranks significantly high for how old of a game it is, for the fact that it's a gateway game, and I'm no longer in that gateway stage of my board gaming experience. And again, the fact that just so many newer, cooler, fresher games have come along the way. Factoring all these things in, Carcassonne is still a very, very highly ranked game for me. I feel like it's endured the test of time better than most games from 15, 20, 25 years ago. And finally, I just want to wrap up with my prognostication where I see Carcassonne going into the future. I see this game experiencing continued success. Klaus-Jürgen Wrede has not done too much since the creation of Carcassonne. He has a few other independent, unique designs, maybe 3 or 4 of them, but for the most part, he's been investing in that, and you can't blame him. He's been very successful and making his money and making his living that way. But I just see continued success with that game, and it's not too far-fetched to believe that you'll see future Carcassonne iterations with other designers or even collaborations with other designers, because you've already seen it in the past, right? So why not? This game has an infinite lifespan as far as that's concerned, because even after Klaus-Jürgen Wrede is done designing games or what have you, retires, rides into the sunset, you're still going to have probably other people who will piggyback on his work, right? On the framework, on this blueprint, and continue to add to the legacy of this gaming system, Carcassonne. And that's all I have to say for today for my episode of Classic Board Game Corner. Carcassonne, one of my favorite games of all time. Thank you so much for joining us here when Harry Met Board Games. Make sure to comment down below, hit the like button, and subscribe. And by the way, if you're interested in supporting this channel and perhaps being a little bit more involved in the creative process, feel free to click on the link down below and check my Patreon account and see what tier is the right one for you. This is Harry from When Harry Met Board Games saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.